Hi, I'm Venitra. My father used to say silence was strength, but all it ever did was bury me. He missed my graduation, mocked my uniform, cut my name from my own mother's funeral. And somehow, that still wasn't the worst of it. They tried to keep me grounded, not just from flying jets, but from believing I was worth anything at all. But what if I told you? The very people who told me I'd never rise were the ones who feared how high I'd fly. Why would a father go so far just to stop his daughter from being seen? The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and perfume. The sun bore down on the high school football field, where rows of folding chairs lined the artificial turf. Families sat in tight clusters, bouquets balanced on laps, camera phones at the ready. The occasional name rang out over the loudspeaker, followed by bursts of cheers and clapping from proud parents. It was supposed to be a day I'd never forget. And it was, but not for the reasons I'd hoped. I kept my eyes locked on the third row, fifth seat from the aisle. It was empty. Everyone else had someone, some beaming parent, tearful grandparent, bouncing sibling. But that seat, that one was mine. And it was vacant. I tried not to let my disappointment show. My mom gave me a half smile from the stands, clutching her purse tightly in her lap like it might anchor her in place. But it was my father's face I'd searched for in the crowd. He had promised to be here. He said he'd move meetings around. He told me this one was important. Something came up at work, his text read. That was all. It wasn't the first time he'd missed something. It wouldn't be the last. But it hurt in a way I hadn't expected, because I had believed him. Just a week earlier, I stood in the background of my brother Caleb's celebration party. Catered food, rented hall, balloons that spelled MBA. Our father had stood at the podium with a glass of champagne, talking about legacy, about drive, about how Caleb was proof of everything good and right in our family. I held an empty plate and listened to applause that wasn't mine. Caleb didn't even like business school. He used to doodle comic book characters in his accounting textbooks, but he knew how to play the part. He had the handshake, the polished shoes, the voice that said all the right things. I had straight A's, a leadership certificate, volunteer hours, but I was dramatic, emotional, too intense. I was also invisible. Standing in my graduation gown, the fabric heavy against my skin, I heard my name announced. Venetra Harland. Mispronounced. Again. The clapping was scattered and brief. Someone in the back yelled for another student. No one stood for me. Not even my mom. I smiled for the camera. Later that evening, I asked her if she'd told Dad I was speaking at the ceremony. She nodded vaguely, opening a bottle of wine. He's proud in his own way, she said. If that was pride, it sure didn't feel like it. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor, my diploma still in its folder. I opened my laptop and typed, "How to join the Air Force." Not on a whim, I'd been thinking about it for months, ever since I watched a YouTube video of an all-female fighter squadron doing a flyover. The roar of those jets stirred something in me, something fierce, something free. I didn't tell anyone, especially not my father. I liked the idea of structure, of knowing where I stood. The military didn't pretend to love you like family and then vanish when it mattered. It had rules, ranks, rituals. You earned your place, or you didn't. But if you did, it was yours. Senior year, I enrolled in JROTC and kept it quiet. I ran laps before school. I practiced salutes in the mirror. When I won a leadership award at the spring banquet, I told my mom. She said she'd pass it along to Dad. I don't know if she ever did. No one clapped at the banquet either, but I clapped for myself. Quietly. Just once. The day after graduation, I found a photo on the kitchen counter, me in my cap and gown standing alone near the school's flagpole. I looked so composed, so polished, but I remembered what I was thinking when they took it. That was the day I stopped waiting for his applause. Sunday dinners were supposed to be warm, a weekly ritual soaked in gravy and laughter, but this one felt like walking into a courtroom. The clinking of silverware echoed like gavel strikes, and I was the only one on trial. My palms sweated against the fabric napkin resting in my lap. The roast smelled like something out of a cooking magazine, but I had no appetite. So, what have you been up to, sweetie? Aunt Lorraine asked between sips of sweet tea, her voice sugary and curious. I glanced at my father, then back at her. This was it. My chance. I forced a smile. I joined ROTC. Training has been intense, but I love it. A pause, a blink, then a chuckle from across the table. My father leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. So you're playing soldier now? The words dropped like lead. Uncle Martin snorted, shaking his head. What's next, V? Camouflage prom dresses? No one laughed harder than Dad. I looked to Mom for something, a hand on my shoulder, even just a glance. But she was busy buttering a roll, as if my dignity wasn't being shredded right in front of her. Even Daxon, my golden boy brother, offered nothing but a smirk, that same look he used to give me when I lost a spelling bee in 4th grade. When they don't believe in you, they don't see your future. And when they don't see your future, they sure as hell won't invest in your present. The next day, after ROTC training, Lieutenant Creighton called me over. He wasn't much for words, and even less for flattery. Former F-22 pilot, square jaw, never smiled unless someone face-planted during drills. But that afternoon, he handed me a sealed envelope. You lead even when no one's watching, he said, eyes steady. That's what makes you a damn good officer. Consider this. Inside were nomination materials for officer school. I blinked. It was rare, almost unheard of, to be considered this early. The paper felt heavy in my hand, like it knew what it meant. That night, I didn't confront my father. Didn't scream. Didn't cry. I sat at my desk with only a flashlight and quiet resolve. I filled out every line of that application like it was a map leading out of a burning building. The louder he mocked me, the more I leaned into silence, because in silence I made my moves. I started waking up before sunrise, doing extra runs around the school track, skipped movie nights, skipped excuses. At ROTC, I became the one others looked to when drills went sideways. I noticed it in the nods, the way people waited for my cue. Teachers started pulling me aside, asking if everything was okay at home. I always said yes, but the truth was, home was just a place where I slept. My real world was being built from sweat and silence. And then came the moment. I sealed the envelope, held it in my hands like it was my own heart, still beating. They'll laugh now, I whispered, sliding it into my backpack. But one day the sky will carry my name. The memory came back to me like a mosquito buzz on a warm summer night, unwanted and insistent. I had tried to bury it, tried to convince myself it didn't matter. But memory has a funny way of whispering just when you think the past is finally quiet. It was late summer 4 years ago. The air was thick with humidity, cicadas screeching from the trees in our backyard. I had invited 2 friends over, Monica and Shay, for lemonade and quiet celebration. Earlier that day, I'd been awarded a regional ROTC leadership honor. Nothing earth-shattering, but something that had made my chest swell with pride. We sat on the porch, giggling, passing around the cheap plastic plaque like it was gold. I didn't expect balloons or banners, just maybe a nod, and I see you. I remember hearing the screen door creak. I looked up to see him, my father, wiping his greasy hands on a rag, a smudge of oil on his cheek. Well, look who it is, he said, his voice booming with that too familiar sarcasm. General Barbie, home from saving the world. My friends laughed, not cruelly, just awkwardly. The way you laugh when a joke isn't funny, but you don't know how not to. I laughed too. God help me, I laughed. But something in my chest tightened, locked. That day, I stopped inviting people over. That day, mockery became his currency. I never told my friends how much it hurt. I just stopped talking about ROTC altogether around him. Even small wins felt dangerous, as if success came at the cost of my dignity. Fast forward to now, present day, I was sitting in the counselor's office, finalizing my officer school paperwork. My fingers trembled as I signed the last form. Everything was in motion, everything I'd built in silence. My world was finally taking shape. Mrs. Hardwick, my counselor, clicked through her computer files, double-checking the submission log. She paused, her eyebrows knitted. There's something odd here, she murmured. Your application shows a rescind request submitted 2 months ago. I blinked. I never submitted anything to cancel. Her eyes met mine. Well, someone did. The system logs it as submitted from your home IP address. A cold wind shot through me, even though we were indoors. I thanked her, excused myself, and walked out, my heart rattling against my ribs. That evening, the garage smelled like gasoline and dust. My father was hunched over his car, the sound of metal against metal echoing in the enclosed space. I stood quietly for a moment, gathering myself. Did you try to pull my officer school application? I asked, my voice flat. He didn't look up, just tightened a bolt. I was protecting you, he said eventually. You're chasing something that isn't real. I didn't want you to fail publicly. The silence between us felt heavier than any words. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just nodded and turned away. But in my head, something clicked. He wasn't afraid I'd fail. He was afraid I'd succeed without needing him. That night, I opened my journal, flipped past pages of training notes, sketches of flight formations, even quotes I liked. I started a new page. Titled it, Operation Reclaim. From then on, I wrote every night, tactics, thoughts, fears, resolve. I spoke voice memos into my phone, reminders to my future self, like armor, but made of ink and intention. You're not broken, I whispered into one recording. You're just finally hearing yourself louder than him. The next morning, I played that memo back as I laced up my boots. For the first time in years, I smiled at my own voice. Not because it was pretty or poetic, but because it sounded like someone I respected, someone I was starting to become. The church smelled like lilies and lemon-scented furniture polish. I stepped through the heavy oak doors in full dress blues, the only one in uniform. The murmurs quieted as I passed the pews, the crisp creases of my pants, the glint of my rank insignia, the steadiness in my walk. Every eye turned, but none of them looked for long. It wasn't respect, it was confusion, a reminder. I didn't fit here anymore. It was my mother's funeral. The pulpit was draped in soft cream linens, her photo framed by roses on a modest pedestal. Marlene Claiborne, beloved wife, loving mother, faithful servant of God. Every word printed beneath her name stung, not because they were untrue, but because they were incomplete. Claiborne, I hadn't called him Dad in years, stood to speak. His voice carried through the wooden beams like a sermon he'd rehearsed 100 times. She was a woman of devotion, he said, eyes dry, posture controlled. Devoted to family, to her husband, and to her children. He never said my name. When Aunt Rhonda shared a story from our childhood, it was about Daxon winning his spelling bee, Mom waving from the back of the gym. When Daxon himself took the pulpit, he recalled baking cookies with her in the kitchen, how she always let him lick the spoon. No one spoke of the woman who stayed up late helping me study for flight navigation exams, who slipped money into my coat pocket before I left for base the first time. No one dared mention the uniform I wore now, as if it were shameful. Then I saw it. The funeral program. I flipped through the folded sheet of paper, skimming the order of service and obituary. My name was missing. Where it should have read, Marlene is survived by her husband Claiborne, son Daxon, and daughter Venitra, it simply said, he, her husband, and children. I wasn't a name, I was a placeholder, a shadow in the background of someone else's life story. It wasn't an oversight, it was strategy. As Claiborne walked back to his seat, our eyes met. Just for a second. His gaze was cold, certain, like a man who believed he'd won something. I looked away first, not out of weakness, but disgust. Outside, the Georgia sun clung to my skin like sweat-stained regret. People mingled in the parking lot, their voices a polite hum of sympathy and small talk. I stood by myself near the edge of the lot, just far enough to breathe. Then I heard the soft patter of little shoes. "Aunt V!" Leora's voice, light as wind chimes, broke through the haze. She ran toward me, her pigtails bouncing, her tiny arms wide. I bent down to catch her in a hug, inhaling the powdery scent of grape bubble gum and vanilla lotion. Are you really the one who flies jets? She asked, her eyes sparkling. Mom says you're in the Air Force, but I told my friends you're a superhero. I smiled, the first real one all day. Is that so? She nodded. You're like the ladies on TV, but cooler. You're real. That moment, that child's pure, undiluted admiration, undid me. Not a speech, not a headline, just her. She believed in me without needing permission. It only takes one voice to remind you who you are. I didn't make a scene. I hugged her goodbye and thanked my sister-in-law politely, then left. No raised voices, no theatrics. Just the sound of my heels tapping against the pavement as I walked away from a family that kept rewriting me out of their story. Hours later, I found myself driving, nowhere in particular, just following the road. The sky was overcast, clouds stacked like unanswered questions. I thought about Mom, about whether she chose silence or was forced into it. I remembered the way Claiborne once interrupted her mid-sentence at a family dinner, correcting her about how much sugar went in the cornbread. She hadn't spoken for the rest of the night. What kind of love demands that kind of silence? Back in my apartment, I pulled out the funeral program. I scribbled a note on a sticky pad and attached it before mailing it to Liat Creighton. She believed in me. She just wasn't allowed to say it. No explanation. He'd understand. A few days later, I stood at the cemetery again. No crowd, no suits, just me, the wind, and the polished gray stone etched with her name. I saluted, the motion sharp and sure, then whispered just loud enough for heaven to hear. You gave me your quiet strength, now I'll speak louder, for both of us. The smell of charcoal and smoked ribs used to mean summer in Georgia. It used to mean laughter, cousins chasing each other barefoot through the grass, and my mother's peach cobbler cooling by the kitchen window. But that day, it meant something else entirely. I didn't want to be there, not really. The only reason I'd agreed to come was because Lyora, my niece, had begged me. Aunt V, it's my birthday. You have to come. She had said it with the same wide-eyed conviction that used to melt my mother's heart. So, I showed up, in uniform, as usual. It wasn't a performance. It was my life, my armor. The backyard buzzed with conversation, country music, and the clatter of folding chairs. Claiborne manned the grill like a king over his fire pit. Daxon held court with a crowd near the cooler. I slipped into the house to check on the cake, figuring I could steal a few quiet moments. I was slicing through the plastic wrap when I heard the sound. Laughter. Loud, raucous, unfiltered. A cousin's phone blared from the living room. Yo, play that again. Then I heard it. His voice. My father's. The recording was grainy, but unmistakable. Taken from a different BBQ, one I hadn't attended. He stood at the same grill, tongs in hand, beer bottle balanced on the side table. She thinks she's a war hero, he said, voice dripping with bourbon and condescension. Can't even fix the damn lawnmower before she ran off in boots. The crowd laughed in the background, family, blood, no one stopped him. No one said, that's not fair. No one remembered the girl who had duct-taped that same lawnmower at 15 just to mow the front yard, because Claiborne said it wasn't a man's job anymore. I slipped out the front door, found my car, and locked it behind me. I pressed play again, just once. He didn't even need an audience anymore, just a reason. I sat in silence, the hum of cicadas and bass from the backyard faint through the glass. Then I opened my phone and deleted the invite to the next family dinner. The notification popped up like a sigh. You will no longer receive event updates. Good. 2 weeks later, a white envelope appeared in my base mailbox. The logo stamped on the upper corner made my stomach flip. Boeing. Inside, an offer sheet. Tactical Operations Director, East Coast Region, relocation bonus, high six-figure salary, full transition package, flexible hours, prestige. It was everything that should have made me feel seen. But instead, it made me feel hollow. The role was impressive, yes, but it would take me off the flight line. No more dawn briefings, no more split-second decisions over cloud banks, no more sky. I left the folder unopened on my desk for 3 days. Then I took it to the gym with me, sat with it over lunch, ran laps around it mentally during night shifts. One evening, my supervisor, Captain Nguyen, caught me staring at it. "You're quiet," she said, wiping sweat from her brow after drills. I shrugged. "Thinking about the offer?" I nodded. She glanced out at the tarmac. The F-22s shimmered under the hangar lights like sleeping beasts. "Bigger doesn't always mean better, Trung-Hui. What still makes you breathe harder?" Her words weren't a lecture. They were a mirror. That night, I opened my email. Typed one line. "Thank you for the generous offer. I respectfully decline." Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked straight to the commanding officer's office. Knocked twice. When he opened the door, I didn't hesitate. "Sir, request reassignment to Frontline Logistics Flight Team." He raised a brow. "That's full-on deployment rotation." "I know," I said, "and I'm ready." He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. Later, I stood in front of the mirror in my barrack, suiting up. Same routine, but this time my hands didn't shake. They tightened every strap, checked every crease, every scar, every morning, every humiliating silence. They'd all built this uniform, thread by thread. I wasn't wearing it to prove anything to them anymore. It was mine. At dawn, I crossed the tarmac with my helmet under my arm, boots hitting concrete like clockwork. The engines roared in the distance. Let them laugh. I'd make thunder louder than their voices. I should have known something was off the moment they started moving my rotation dates around like checkers. One day, I was cleared for a logistics run over Nevada, and the next I was told to stand by without further explanation. At first, I chalked it up to base reshuffling, but then words started to ripple quietly through the hangars, not through official channels, but in the uneasy glances from my fellow pilots. "You hear about Venitra?" one whispered when they didn't think I was in earshot. That's when I knew. This wasn't a coincidence, this was orchestration. A buddy of mine, Sanchez, finally pulled me aside during a night shift in the simulator bay. "Your name came up in a back-channel review," he said, eyes darting toward the shadows. "Something about emotional instability. Source came from DC, someone with legacy stripes." That was the Air Force's polite way of saying, an old boy from the war room days just picked up the phone. I didn't need a roster to guess who. My father, Claiborne, had enough retired drinking buddies to run a ghost battalion. I could practically hear him saying it. "She's smart, sure, but too damn hot-headed, not stable enough to lead." I went straight to my CO the next morning. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. "Sir," I began, keeping my voice level, "is my reassignment delay tied to any external recommendations?" He didn't blink. "What are you asking, Lieutenant? Did someone from outside the chain of command influence my review?" A pause. Too long. Then, "You need to be cautious, Lieutenant. Perception matters as much as performance." Translation: "Yes, but I'm not going to put it in writing." My stomach tightened. Not with fear, with clarity. They weren't going to stop me with direct orders. They were going to starve me of opportunity. 2 days later, I sat in a mission briefing for a late-night supply drop. The flyover route skimmed low along a mountainous area with recently fluctuating thermal drafts. Worse, the drop zone overlapped with a section flagged weeks ago for increased civilian activity due to a local outreach event. I raised my hand mid-briefing. "Sir, was the civilian presence in Zone Echo accounted for in the final flight plan?" Another pilot chuckled. "Come on, V, that's command-level intel. We're just the air legs." But my gut wouldn't sit still. I requested 5 minutes after the session and pulled up old charts, civilian advisories, and weather forecasts. The risk wasn't theoretical, it was tangible, and yet no one was blinking. So I made my move. 30 minutes before takeoff, I submitted an official mission objection, citing safety concerns, forcing an automatic delay. You could hear the silence spread across base command like wildfire. I was summoned before my CO within the hour. He looked like he hadn't blinked since he read the report. "You know what this looks like, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." "It looks like I stopped us from possibly killing someone." He didn't argue, but the reprimand came anyway. Procedural violation, disrupting mission cadence. But I stayed on active duty. Later, quietly, it came out that a school group had extended their field trip without notifying authorities. Their tent site? Smack in the middle of Zone Echo. They classified the incident as adjusted logistics. No press, no thank yous, just back to work like nothing happened. But I knew, and they knew. That night, I sat alone at my locker, peeling off my flight gloves with stiff fingers. My flight patch caught the dim overhead light. I touched it slowly, the fabric familiar, steady. "They can try to shrink my wings," I whispered to myself, "but they'll never fold my spine." The screech of my ringtone shattered the stillness before dawn. I rolled over, groggy, and saw the call was from base PR. That never meant good news. "Lieutenant Marlowe," the voice said briskly, "we need you in the media room, now." 15 minutes later, I was staring at a screen with a headline that twisted my stomach. "Rogue Officer Delays Mission, Jeopardizing Timeline." Below was a photo of the base runway, one I knew well, and the article painted a version of events so skewed it almost felt fictional. It claimed emotional instability, disregard for orders, and an inflated sense of self-righteousness. Not one word about the civilian school group that would have been caught in the drop zone. The phrasing was surgical, designed to wound without drawing blood. I recognized it like the back of my hand. My father used that same tone when giving speeches at political fundraisers, spinning facts into fiction with a smile. "They want you to stay quiet," the PR officer said, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "Let official comms handle it." I nodded once. It was the only move I had. For now. But the base had already changed. I felt it walking through the corridors, in the clipped greetings and forced smiles. People avoided eye contact. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Even Dana, my old roommate and fellow pilot, kept her distance in the mess hall. She gave me a small, strained smile, then turned away without a word. That night, I found a folded slip of paper wedged into the seam of my locker door. "You're being watched. Stay procedural. Don't slip. No name. Just the kind of handwriting that suggested speed and secrecy." Later, I checked my laptop logs. Sure enough, folders I hadn't touched in weeks were marked with new timestamps. Someone had been in my system. I started sleeping with my boots on. I needed a lifeline, so I called Marcus. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, but I knew he still worked cybersecurity at Langley. We didn't exchange pleasantries, just what mattered. "They're building a case," he said flatly. "And they're not coming for the truth. They're coming for a version that fits what they want to believe." I asked what I should do. "Stay in control. Log everything. Document more than you breathe." That night, I started my own file. Every flight schedule, every briefing summary, every casual comment that made my skin crawl. I backed them all up to a drive I wore on a chain beneath my uniform. Let them build a story. I'd write the truth. Instead of lashing out, I laid a trap. I contacted an Air Force alumni newsletter. Small, loyal, respected. I didn't sign my name, but I gave them just enough to verify. The story ran a week later. "Officer flags civilian risk, prevents disaster." No byline, no photos, just facts. It spread through the inboxes of generals and veterans like a quiet ripple, the kind that sinks deep before it makes a sound. 2 days after the article posted, I spotted them. 2 men in civilian clothes standing across the tarmac, reviewing flight schedules and whispering behind sunglasses. They weren't from my unit, they weren't from the base, but they were watching me. I adjusted my collar, straightened my spine, and met their gaze without blinking. If I'm their project, they better hope I don't finish first. The runway lights still glowed when I slipped out of the squadron's barracks. Dawn was silver gray, not yet burning into gold. My flight suit felt heavier this morning, not because of the fabric, but because this was the moment I'd been pushing toward. The moment they said yes. I'd written to command more times than I can remember. Emails, requests, briefings, appeals. Each one carefully written, copying mission logs, safety reports, civilian advisories. Always respectful, always professional. I clutched my folder as I walked across the concrete expanse, tarmac cold under my boots. Tonight's mission would follow the dangerous route near the border of civilian zones, the route I had argued against before, and yet, today, I was cleared. Final clearance came in a terse message hours earlier. My request was granted. My heart thumped loud enough I could swear I heard it in the hum of idle engines. Colleagues nodded as I passed, some with surprise, some with grudging admiration. I saw Captain Nguyen just for a second. She raised her visor, that was all. We assembled on the apron, helicopters, support crews, fuel trucks, pre-flight checks. I strapped on my helmet, clipped the visor down, my skin tight with adrenaline. The F-22s, sleek silhouettes in the dim light, roared on the runway, one by one. Then they took to the sky, formation tight, wings angled. The first jet screamed past overhead, followed by two more, then four, all in formation, screaming sunrise into existence. The formation swept low across the runway, engines roaring, contrails glowing faint in the early light. Over the loudspeaker, call sign Valkyrie, cleared for flyover. My name in that air, not printed on a program, not whispered, but announced. People stopped in their tracks, heads leaned back, phones lifted. Silence briefly replaced the usual bustle because sound like that demands attention. I stood at attention, boots rooted, chest swelling, the roar washing over me like vindication. Not because they finally believed, but because they could no longer pretend I didn't exist. Then I saw him, my father, watching from a booth behind the crowd, his posture stiff, lips pressed, eyes wide. I glanced away. I didn't need his validation, but I didn't hide from him either. Later, after we landed, voices carried in the debrief tent. A reporter asked him during a catered reception if he believed in me now. He hesitated, then nodded, wordless, but enough. My hands shook when I later logged into the secure terminal. I sent copies of the mission plans, my previous requests, my rebuttals, every blocked path, every delay. I didn't demand reward, I demanded recognition of truth. In my bunk that night, I slept poorly. Images of the flyover in the sky, the roar in my ears, Dad's nod bouncing back and forth, admiration without apology. I recorded a message to myself. They hear my engines now. Let them remember the sound. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere overhead, jets had separated. Now distant, now fading. The sky still echoes with jets. It's not silence anymore. The applause from the flyover still echoed in my chest as I stepped off the tarmac. My boots hit the concrete with a new kind of weight. Not fatigue, not doubt, but something heavier and steadier. Consequence. I barely made it back to my quarters before someone slipped a folded note under my door. No name, no fanfare, just 4 words scribbled in urgent ink. Check the log file from Flight 47. I froze. Flight 47 had been a fog-wrapped night. Unexpected crosswinds, a malfunctioning nav beacon, the kind of mission where every second stretched like an hour, where breath got caught between instinct and protocol. I remembered deviating slightly from the planned drop path, just a few degrees off, but it kept us away from what I suspected was a civilian convoy traveling through a mountain pass. It wasn't in the report. No one mentioned it. Not then. I logged into the mission terminal, fingers steady, even as my heart picked up pace. Buried deep in Marcus's debrief, a secondary communication file I hadn't accessed before, was his comment. Lot. Clay's course correction likely prevented a civilian encounter. Recommend commendation, though deviation noted. No one ever followed up. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. For all the noise they made about protocol, not one word had been spoken about this. And now someone was reminding me, quietly, deliberately, that lives were saved. Later that day, Marcus found me by the coffee machine. No salutes, no formalities, just a long look and a nod. You saved lives that night, he said. Thought you should know someone noticed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Word spread faster than I expected. Not the whole truth, of course, just fragments, whispered phrases in mess halls, a headline that grazed my inbox. Heroism or disobedience. Somehow my father saw it. He always did when the narrative involved me, especially if it carried ambiguity. There was a clip circulating online, a local panel discussing the incident. The anchor leaned into the camera and asked, "Does courage mean bending the rules, or is discipline our only safety?" They called my father, a decorated veteran, a man of principles, tradition. He appeared via call-in, voice measured, tone cold. "Discipline keeps people alive," he said. Sentiment. Sentiment leads to headlines. I watched him on screen. For a moment, I thought I saw something crack across his face. Not regret, not pride, but something in between. Maybe the beginning of recognition, or maybe not. I didn't linger on it. Instead, I opened a secure email and compiled every report I had. My logs, Marcus's debrief, radar data, weather overlays. I wrote no introduction, made no emotional appeal. I sent it to the Air Force Alumni Journal and let the evidence speak. 2 weeks later, they ran the story. Venitra Clay, when obedience fails lives, courage writes its own orders. There was no glossy photo, no dramatic retelling, just facts. Quiet, undeniable facts. At sunset, I found myself back at the runway, the same one where the jets had saluted me, the sky now turning orange, my uniform catching the last rays of the day. I looked down at my shadow, long, steady, wearing the uniform they once said I couldn't fill. My first flight wasn't my most public, I whispered to no one, but it's the one they'll never rewrite. The alert came through like a siren tearing through routine. I was at my station, running a systems diagnostic for flight pattern recalibrations, when the first tremor alert pinged on the shared command interface. A glance. Then a double take. Seismic activity, Northern California. 7.1 magnitude. My breath caught. Not because of the magnitude, but because of the coordinates blinking on the screen. That was home. Not a general area. Not a region. That was my street. Reports came in waves. Collapsed roads, power outages, and tremors strong enough to knock down brick storefronts. I leaned in closer, heart already tightening. It wasn't just my town. It was my childhood home, the place I used to walk barefoot down the driveway, where the cracks in the pavement were more familiar than faces. I stood too fast, my headset cord yanked out. A fellow officer asked if I was okay. I mumbled something vague and walked straight out of the operations room. My hands didn't tremble. They were too focused, too clenched. Back in my quarters, I pulled up flight options. Civilian flights were backed up, emergency zones were freezing travel. I made one call to an old logistics contact in base transport, pulled a favor I'd been saving since officer school. No details, just urgency. He asked nothing and booked me on a red-eye to Sacramento. From there, I'd figure it out. I didn't even wait for leave authorization. I knew it wouldn't come. By the time I landed, it felt like a movie set for disaster. But no cameras, just dust, sirens, cracks in the freeway like veins splitting open. My hometown was almost unrecognizable. The high school gym was a collapsed shell. The diner where I spent prom night flattened. I pulled my hoodie tighter around my head as I walked past fire trucks and FEMA tents. No one noticed me. I wasn't in uniform. I wasn't anyone special here. Just a daughter. The house was worse than I imagined. The roof had split down the center like an open wound. The chimney lay in chunks, scattered like toppled chess pieces. Neighbors lingered nearby, faces pale, some bandaged. Mrs. Harrow from across the street clutched a flashlight and muttered, "We haven't seen Claiborne since early this morning." Of course not. My father was always the type to handle things alone. Or hide. Maybe both. I picked my way through the wreckage, each step triggering a memory like a landmine. The cracked tile by the front door, where I scraped my knee running from his belt. The living room wall, where he hung my brother's medals, none of mine. A support beam had fallen diagonally through the hallway, pinning part of the staircase. I climbed over, bracing on the door frames, scanning the rubble. That's when I saw it. His old service tags, partially buried in insulation foam, and a notebook, black leather, frayed on the edges. I picked it up, brushing off soot and ash. His handwriting, blocky, stubborn, familiar. Notes about bills, repairs. One entry read, V called, didn't pick up, not sure what to say. Proud, don't know how to say that either. My hands tightened around the cover. I never made that call, not out loud. But maybe, in some way, he heard me anyway. A noise pulled me back. A cough. Faint. But there, coming from under the porch. I dropped the notebook and crawled forward, ears straining. Again, a cough. I moved debris with trained precision, calling out his name. Dad? A grunt, then, over here, V? He was alive, trapped beneath splintered planks and a fallen support beam, his face streaked with blood and dust, one leg twisted beneath rubble. His voice was hoarse but steady. I told him the foundation was shot, he tried to joke. I didn't laugh. Emergency responders were 2 blocks away, still coordinating triage zones. I didn't wait. I remembered every survival drill, every protocol. I used leverage from broken fence posts and old metal piping to wedge space around his torso. My palms blistered. My back screamed. But I didn't stop. Then I found his hand. Cold, but gripping mine. I never knew, he whispered, barely audible, how strong you really were. Sirens were closing in now. I kept digging. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet. The machines hummed in steady rhythm, each beep a reminder that Dad was still alive, even if everything else between us felt like it had shattered. I sat by his bed, gloved hands resting on the white sheets, wondering how much time had passed since we last had a conversation that wasn't calculated or guarded. His injuries were stable, but the space between us was unstable. Years of silence, shame, expectations, all lining up like broken frames in an abandoned house. I thought I remembered childhood differently. Warm dinners, moments when he'd smile. But he remembered keeping me safe, he said once. So safe that I lost the chance to be seen. I pulled out the notebook I found in the rubble days ago. I'd brushed off the dust but hadn't read much until now. Tonight I opened it, all the frayed edges and coffee stains and fingerprints. Between his penciled entries, I found something that made me shake. It read, Venitra got led in flight drills, called too much by officers I admired. I saw her grit, wanted to praise her, didn't know how. Another entry, years later. Her path scares me, not because I doubt her, but because I saw what war did to me, how it took voices, peace, sleep. He'd been writing for years, not just about bills and repairs, but regrets, quiet hopes, fear. Dad stirred. The ventilator hissed softly. I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Dad, I said, voice steady, though every muscle in me shook. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was rain-red pain, but also something like relief. I thought if I said it out loud, he whispered, you'd see what I saw, and choose silence over this life. I didn't hate your career, I feared it would break you. My heart splintered, then softened. Not because I needed apologies, but because I needed truth. We talked. Not the rehearsed kind of talk, the kind that quivers between us, unguarded. I told him about the flyover, the logged mission, the anonymous newsletter story. He listened, quiet, each sound in this room magnified. Heart monitor, ceiling fan, me trying to explain. He asked about the F-22s. I told him what being honored felt like. How hearing my name over the loudspeakers wasn't about applause, it was about being acknowledged after so long. He blinked. One tear tracked down his cheek, not a confession made for show. One born from seeing something he'd helped bury. I nodded. For the first time, I understood him. Not completely, but enough. When he fell asleep, I slipped outside into the early morning light. The sky was pale blue, mist still clinging to the edges. A jet rumbled overhead, maybe in training, maybe heading out. I followed the sound, standing under it, letting it wash over me. My phone buzzed. It was a message from base. I was being considered for a leadership role in a test flight division. It was new, scary, but right. I stood there, uniform crisp, chest heavy, the hospital behind me, and I whispered, one mission at a time, one breath at a time. I should have sensed the danger the moment they handed me the file. The envelope was sealed, stamped top secret, and delivered to me in person by Captain Nguyen. It contained the details of the elite test flight mission, restricted airspace, black ops recon, high risk. My pulse thudded under the uniform I'd learned to wear like armor. I thumbed through coordinates, redacted lines, mission schedules. Something didn't add up. The flight path mirrored my mother's last assignment, the date, the zone, even the notation about satellite interferers. It was all eerily familiar. Then I found it. A secure memo, buried in archived files. Authorizing officer, General Loris. Mentor, teacher, once someone I admired above all. The man who taught me to read flight maps and dream beyond the stars. He'd been beside Dad at every ceremony, offered guidance during every doubt, or so I thought. Now I saw the signature at the bottom, Loris. He wasn't just giving advice, he was planning again. A training accident, they'd call it. A mission gone wrong. And just like they'd done for Mom, the hangar was cold, cavernous, with shadows long and chilling. I confronted him there at dawn, engines idle behind us. Why now? I asked, voice not trembling, though my soul quaked. He looked at me without recognition at first, surprised, then pity, then something like sorrow. You always thought it was shame, he said quietly, that I judged you, that I withheld praise. It was never shame, Venitra. It was fear. Fear your mother's truths, about ethics, about whistleblowing, would undo everything I built. I pressed harder. You engineered her capture. Let my father carry blame. Shape the story. You thought no one would ever dig. He twitched. She exposed systems I believed in. Systems filled with compromise. If her voice lived, the cracks would show. He paused, his mouth set. Then he spat out, I did what I thought was protecting her legacy. I had anticipated lies. I had expected deflection. But betrayal cuts sharper than fiction. He threatened, this mission will disappear, you'll vanish, no one will hear of you. I was ready, because I had been preparing for this moment for years. I activated the wire I'd placed beneath my collar, hidden drone already in the rafters. Live feed streaming back to command and civilian oversight. The guards moved toward me. General Loras reached for a sidearm. But before he could, military police burst in, armed with arrest orders. Someone higher up had been watching. My dossier, the evidence I'd collected, every mission request, every denied plea, every blocked path, laid bare. They cuffed him. He stared at me with broken admiration. I walked toward the stealth fighter they had planned to blame on me, my heart hammered. I climbed in, ignored the gasps from the ground crew. The roar turned over my bones and into my breath. I flew her mother's last path. I dropped flare at the exact coordinates where Mom vanished. Flame against darkness, a flare that illuminated the truth. On the ground, cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, bases buzzed. The story went viral, not glamorous, messy, honest. They rededicated Hangar Marlene Claiborne beside the runway, my name echoing in speakers once refusing to say it. Dad, in a wheelchair at the front, gave me something I never expected, a smile, tears in his eyes, pride. And I felt it, real and molten in my chest. Dusk settled over the control tower. I leaned against the railing, call sign patch gleaming dim in the twilight. For every silence they forced on us, we speak louder now. The sky remembers my name. When I look back at everything, from the silence that tried to shrink me, to the skies that echoed my name, I realized this journey was never just about proving someone wrong. It was about finally choosing to believe I belonged long before the world ever did. If there's one thing I've learned as a woman, a soldier, a daughter, and a survivor, it's this. You are not defined by those who underestimate you. You are shaped by how you rise when they do. To every woman who's ever felt unseen at the dinner table, to every daughter who was told to stay small, to every person who's been silenced, doubted, or dismissed, I see you. And more importantly, I believe in what you can become. Your scars aren't weakness, they are your stripes. Now let me ask you, what legacy are you building even when no one's watching? What dream are you still holding on to, even when the applause never came? Drop a comment and tell me, what part of this story hit home for you? Did you ever feel overlooked, but found strength in your silence? If this video touched something in you, type 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. I want to hear your truth too. And hey, if you made it this far, that means something. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your chest, don't just scroll away. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. I promise, every voice matters here, especially yours.